Sometimes we feel like some of these environmental restrictions are just that, but there is a reason behind them, right? Ultimately, we want to live in healthy, safe communities, and we want to maintain the quality of life. So the provisions that they put in place when you apply for FEMA grants, there is logic behind it, and we just want to make the process as easy as possible. The environmental and historic preservation requirements are designed to ensure that all practical means and measures are used to protect, restore, and enhance the quality of the environment. The requirements haven't changed, but the applicant is now responsible for more than they had been in the past, so that's the big change. In the past, FEMA has done the studies. Now the cities are responsible, or the counties, or whoever the applicant is. You guys are responsible for making sure that you're in EHP compliance. That's the grant recipient's responsibility now. So you gather the information, and then FEMA makes the ultimate determination about whether or not you're in compliance. So what you need to do is, from the very beginning, when you have an idea, you need to reach out to FEMA, the regional administrator, for guidance on the scope and level of environmental information required for your application. And then you need to conduct the studies that FEMA deems necessary. And once you've done the appropriate studies and determined the impact, then you'll be able to consult with federal, regional, and state local agencies to make sure that you've covered all of your bases. Then, if you are disturbing the ground on the project that you're doing, the mitigation project, then you will have to, monitor the staging of the equipment, the road repairs, the temporary roads, whatever you're doing that causes any kind of disturbance will have to be monitored throughout the project. Now, FEMA reviews all of your actions to ensure that you're in compliance. They have different levels of documentation that they're going to require based on the type of project. So there are some statutory exclusions, which means you don't have to do anything. But the categorical exclusions, meaning that there's no significant effect on the environment and they're excluded from further review, as long as you comply with the environmental laws and executive orders. And then if it is more involved, then you have to do an environmental assessment, and that covers the affected environment and the potential impacts. Janet talked about this earlier, and she said that we need to not just talk about what our best case scenario, like why we're doing this and what we want to do with it, but the different approaches we could take to mitigate the hazard and how it would impact the environment, including if we did nothing. So that's got to be one of the things that you consider when you're looking at what your project's going to cost, because these are costs that you wouldn't have had before to do the environmental impact study or whatever is required based on the type of project you're doing. If it is more involved, there is an environmental impact statement that is required on some projects, but from the research I've done, FEMA usually the project, like the grants we're talking about, don't fall under that category. So that's pretty rare. The extraordinary circumstances that would require an environmental impact statement or an environmental evaluation would be if they're greater in scope and size, if there's a lot of controversy, like if there's a nonprofit or someone, an environmental group that's upset over the project that you're proposing, if they're degrading existing poor environmental conditions or unproven technology, if there's an endangered or threatened species, or you're getting involved with hazardous or toxic substances, or has the potential to adversely affect special status areas or critical resources. So if health and safety is involved, or you're violating a law, or there's special requirements because it's an environmentally protected area, then that's when the higher reporting requirements are going to come into play. So here are the different agencies that you need to check with when you've got your idea for your project, whatever it is. You need to reach out to these different agencies and just consult with them and have them take a look to make sure that it doesn't impact migratory birds, or it isn't a problem for something on the endangered species. And it's not just animals on the endangered species, it's also plants and soils, and so there's a whole range of things that are covered. There's also state, tribal, and local laws and regulations. So your local area might have something that's more restrictive than other places in the state. And then there are some executive orders that are covered. There's one that covers floodplains and wetlands, and then there's also a statute or an executive order that's an environmental justice issue, where the health or environment of minority or low-income populations are affected. So the EHP review is impacted by the ways that you can, make sure that you don't run into any hang-ups along the way. You've got a complete SAU, and the complexity of the project, the location and types of resources that are being affected have been considered during the initial stages when you're looking at your project, and whether you've consulted with the necessary agencies like Fish and Wildlife. And if you do that and get all of your documentation in order, then there shouldn't be an issue when you're in the review process. The timeline, if you do have to do a CADEX, it's 6 to 8 weeks for FEMA to process it, so take that into consideration. If you have to do an EA, it takes a month for the project review and then 3 to 6 months to prepare that EA. And then FEMA funded projects typically don't involve the complexity that warrants an EIS like we discussed. So you can help speed up the process by just anticipating the impact and the natural and cultural environment around you and reaching out to the agencies where this is their area of expertise. Some big do's and don'ts: just don't initiate a project until you're sure it's compliant. Do contact FEMA early for guidance, because that's their role now. They're more of a guidance instead of doing all the work for us. Do consult with federal, state, tribal, and local agencies and all interested parties early in the planning process. And if you don't do these things, the consequences are as minor as your project just might be delayed, or they can be as severe as civil penalties and lawsuits and denial of funding. So worst case scenario, you could have your project thrown out because you didn't follow these different steps. So just some things to consider. It's just basically like this is one more step that you as the agency will have to take, and you need to consider that in your funding and make sure that you have money in place to be able to cover the cost of doing these studies. If you have any question, reach out to the proper agency. They'll be able to tell you. FEMA will make the ultimate determination. And this little handout that I gave you, the project types and EHP coordination requirements, this is from FEMA. They actually generated this, and it just talks about different project types and the agency that you would reach out to. So it's just kind of a little easy way to look at your project, see if it fits under one of those, and then it will tell you whether or not you need to check with that agency to see whether or not your project might impact that area.